Masha Gessen is a Russian-American author and political activist. She, too, has been a vociferous critic of the Kremlin. She left Moscow a few years ago as the country began ramping up its anti-gay laws. Here's a quote from Masha's op-ed in the New York Times about the quick killing. Quote, "The message was clear. People will be killed in the name of the Kremlin, in plain view of the Kremlin, against the backdrop of the Kremlin, simply for daring to oppose the Kremlin." Masha, to begin, what should we know about Boris Nemtsov and his role in the opposition?
I think part of the reason this killing is so shocking to Russians is that he was very much part of the political establishment for so many years. You know, he didn't seem like the kind of maverick who was always sticking his head out, although if you think about it, he was. He was very vocal in his opposition. He was very consistent, which is a very rare quality for a Russian politician. He'd been talking about the nature of the Putin regime for a decade at this point, but it felt like he was part of the landscape. It didn't feel like he was a combatant to the extent that he would be killed, and I think that's part of the reason people are shocked.
I think Americans woke up to this story on Saturday morning and they wanted to know to what extent is President Putin responsible.
You have to understand something about the place where he was killed. If you're on that bridge and you take, say, a camera out with a zoom lens,
yep,
presidential guard will be on you in a second. I was once in a group of bicyclists, just a large group of bicyclists that went under the bridge. 15 presidential guard ran to us to see what this irregular occurrence was, a large group of bicyclists in the evening, right? So somebody gets killed, gets shot at least 4 times on the bridge, and we have seen in the surveillance tapes, the body was on the bridge for 10 minutes before the regular police came. The presidential guard didn't even bother to walk over from the Kremlin to see what had happened. I think that tells us everything we need to know.
Masha, you get a sense of panic coming out of Moscow. As you just pointed out, if Boris Nemtsov isn't safe, then no one is. Let me read you a brief quote from what Edward Lucas wrote in the Daily Mail. He's, of course, a longtime Russia observer at The Economist. Russia's history is drenched in blood and tears. It would not be the first time that a single high-profile murder has spiraled into widespread cycle of death. The most obvious example is the Stalinist purges of the 30s, and this was after Sergei Kirov was killed. Is this an apt comparison? Is this panic merited?
I'd stay away from the comparison to Kirov just because it raises more questions than it answers. But I think what's frightening about this is that I think the Kremlin has been fielding an uncontrollable force, a sort of a group of avengers who are encouraged to go after the internal opposition. And I think what we saw was the first killing in that campaign. And this is really frightening. I mean, we know there are these internet lists of the opposition circulating. There are many people who are on them, and every one of them has good reason to be scared for their lives.
Yeah.